Have you ever wondered how much it costs to drive around Australia? The Big Lap of Australia is the adventure of a lifetime. Many people work and save their whole lives to do this epic road trip. But how much money do you need to save, and can you get work on the road? How did we afford to travel around Australia for 3.5 years? These are things that you might want to know, but often don't know who to ask. In this video, we'll answer all those questions and more. And stick around to the end as we share some little known tips for saving money on your travels. Now, of course, some of these costs you'll have whether you're at home or whether you're travelling. We all have to eat, right? But even with those everyday expenses, we found quite big variations as we travelled around the country. Now, we're going to break this video down into categories and give you a bit of an idea of what we would spend and what you could expect to spend for each of these categories.
Okay, fuel. Depending on how quickly you travel, fuel is going to be your greatest expense. Also factoring in whether it be petrol or diesel, are you driving a large camper van like a Winnebago, or are you towing a caravan? We travelled in a diesel-powered four-wheel drive Mercedes Sprinter van, and that weighs in at 4.5 tonnes. Our fuel economy worked out to be about 12.5 litres to the 100 kilometres, and that's translated as 8 kilometres per litre. Of course, we did a mix of highway driving along with a mix of gravel roads, some pretty hardcore off-roading with steep terrain, and that's obviously going to mean your fuel economy worsens. Now that said, we're very, very happy with the overall fuel economy in our van.
We asked some of our friends what their fuel economy was like for a comparison. Maria and Toby in their Troopy, Alan and Jess and their vintage van, the Van Life Straya family towing their new van, and Jordan and Annalise with a similar van travelling in the UK and Europe.
Now, you'll also have to factor in your fuel price. When we first started our trip back in February of 2021, we were paying around $1.30 per litre of diesel. The price has gone up a lot since then, in the 3 years that we've been on the road, with $2 being kind of like the average at the moment, and if we're paying under $2 a litre, we're kind of celebrating. As you head out of the cities and into the more remote locations of Australia, your fuel price is going to become more expensive. Early in our trip, we found the most expensive place was up in far north Queensland at a place called Bramwell Station.
We are this morning in Bramwell Junction, so we just filled up with fuel. We paid $2.05 a litre, which is nuts. Normally it's like $1.30.
Just over a year later, we were in WA, Western Australia, and we would have been happy to pay $2.05. We actually paid almost $3. We're in a mining town called Tom Price, and I think we paid $2.89 per litre of diesel.
Thieving you-know-what's at Tom Price. They know that everybody has to fill up here. Look at the price of this fuel.
Bloody highway robbery.
In terms of budget, we would try to only fill up once a week, which would cost us anywhere between $150 to $200. But there were some weeks where we drove a lot of kilometres. And I remember one week that we filled the tank 3 times. So obviously that's going to blow out our budget when we're spending $500 or $600 in the week on fuel alone. The second category is food or groceries. And like I said earlier, we've all got to eat. And this category is a close contender with fuel for the most expensive category in our budget. Of course, in the larger cities and towns, you'll find plenty of Coles and Woolworths supermarkets, but as you move away from those towns, you're going to be relying a lot more on IGA and smaller supermarkets, general stores, that sort of thing. So not only are the prices more expensive, but also you're going to find that you can't get the same range of food that you could. Sadly, having only a small fridge and limited storage space, you can't really stock up when you're in the big towns. We did have the box of death, as we called it, our storage area under the bench seat where we could store lots of cans and dry food and that sort of thing. So we were able to carry quite a bit of food. But in terms of fresh food, fresh fruit and vegetables, we were really limited there, particularly once we headed into the outback. As we travelled, we did try to buy locally as much as we could, so we would stop at those roadside food stalls. We had like fresh fruit and veggies up in far north Queensland. Down in Tassie, we even found a couple that had home-baked bread. They were amazing. And then, of course, there were farmers markets, Rusty's Market in Cairns.
Thanks, Warren.
There was a great market down on the Fleurieu Peninsula in South Australia. We would try and shop at those whenever possible. And it was always fun to shop for local specialties as well. I mean, just ask Nigel about the oysters, both in Coffin Bay in South Australia and pretty much everywhere in Tassie. He was in heaven. So in terms of our budget and what we spent, our weekly grocery budget was around $150 when we first started. That did from time to time blow out to $200, and by the end of the trip it was definitely closer to $200 a week that we were spending on our groceries. Now then, of course, it comes to eating out and takeaways. If you've watched our videos for a while, you'll know we are a bit fond of fish and chips, and we try to limit ourselves to once a week, you know, just because we're trying to watch the waistline. But look, honestly, we don't eat out that often, and this was one of the ways that we really kept that food budget down by preparing our meals in the van. Another big expense that some people have is buying coffees out. That's something that we really try to avoid as much as possible. We love making, well, Nigel loves making coffee, and he makes a really good coffee. We use an AeroPress, and we did buy local coffee as we were going. So particularly we loved the Australian grown Skyberry coffee up in far north Queensland. And we also got great coffee down in Tasmania, the Cheeky Devil coffee that we got at the Salamanca markets, and we later actually went out to his roastery and bought a whole kilo of it because it was that good there. Now, because our van is set up to be self-contained and for us to be able to spend time off-grid, we saved quite a bit of money by free camping wherever possible. We used the Wikicamps app to find free camps as we were travelling, but also we got recommendations both off social media and from other travellers that we met along the way. If you want to know more about our favourite free camps, go check out this video where we counted down our top 10 free camps. Now, of course, free camping isn't for everybody. Some people like the security of a caravan park. They like the facilities there and the social aspect as well. But for us, we love that kind of being out in the wild, out in nature, secluded. That is really kind of our style a lot more. But having said that, some of the free camps that we stayed at were pretty crowded as well. We also spent quite a number of nights in national park campsites, and this is a great way to save a bit of money while still having some facilities. Most of the national park campsites that we stayed in had at least a drop toilet. Some of them even had showers. Now, the price of these varied quite a bit. In Queensland and Northern Territory, they were around $6 to $7 per person, but even in the most expensive state, Western Australia, I think they were around $30 per person for most of them. So if you compare that to caravan parks, which are around $50 or more, even for an unpowered site, you'll see that that's quite a good way to save a lot of money as you are travelling around. The next category we've called entrances. So we're not really into doing touristy things as we travel around. We much prefer to get out in nature, hiking, mountain biking, snorkeling, kiteboarding, doing those sort of adventure activities. But as we travelled around, there were a few things that we considered absolute must-dos. So things like the Gordon River cruise down in Tasmania, the day trip over to Rottnest Island, and the Kark Aboriginal cultural experience in Central Australia. We were also lucky enough to do a helicopter ride in Kakadu when we visited there in the wet season, which was absolutely amazing. And some of these things really are once in a lifetime experiences. So those sort of things we were happy to pay for, and we consider that money well spent. We also needed to pay national park entry fees, and I touched on camping in the national parks. That's one expense, but there's also the expense of entering into the national parks. Now, some of the states you don't have to pay to go into the national parks at all. Yay, Queensland. But others you do. There's a daily charge, or you can buy an annual pass. So we were able to save a lot of money in Western Australia by buying an annual pass, which was $120 for the vehicle for the year, and also down in Tasmania. So Tassie's pretty cool because you can either buy a day pass, then I think there's a weekly pass, and what they call the holiday pass, which is a 2-month pass, and that worked out to be quite economical as well. While we're talking about national parks, remember that there's a couple of parks in Australia that are administered by the federal government, not by their respective state governments. So I'm thinking about Uluru and Kakadu in the Northern Territory. They have their own separate entry fees, and also the Kosciuszko National Park in New South Wales. So this is a tricky one to actually budget for or say that we spent this much a week, because sometimes we wouldn't spend any money on those sort of things for months at a time, and then other times we might have 3 or 4 of those big expenses all in the same week. Now, the next category is alcohol. I'm not going to lie, we love a drink. If you've watched our videos at all, you'll know how much we love craft beer. We love going round to the breweries, and we also don't mind a glass of wine every now and again. This is not to say that we're big drinkers or that we're encouraging alcohol consumption. We don't drink every day, but you know, nothing beats going out on a big hike and coming back and having a nice cold beer at the end of it. And we felt like we were supporting the locals when we were checking out those local breweries. That's our story, and we're sticking to it. And there are so many cool little small breweries, especially in Tasmania. Maybe we should do a video on that, the best craft breweries that we visited. Let us know down in the comments if you'd like to see that video. Over the course of our trip, we probably spent $50 to $100 a week on alcohol.
Now, driving 80,000 kilometres, at some point you're going to have some maintenance expenses. Things are going to break. It's machinery, right? Now, we only had the one major breakdown of any consequence, and that was down to human error. I'll take the can for that. And it caused a short circuit. Thankfully, we had really good comprehensive breakdown coverage, and we didn't have to pay for that rescue. The repair itself, it cost us less than $500. During our travels, we've had to pay for a new set of tyres. That was up in Darwin. Now, we have dual wheels on the back, so that means 6 tyres, and a couple of flat tyres. We had a particularly adventurous trip to get to the Oodnadatta Road on a very muddy track, and as a result we had to replace the centre tailshaft bearing. Of course, extraordinary repairs can never really be accounted for, so we do suggest that you keep a little bit of money in the kitty to cover those unforeseen, unfortunate breakdowns. Oh, and don't forget your breakdown cover. We went through RACQ, and that cost us $400 per annum, and that covered us for that breakdown I mentioned earlier. The rescue on the back of a truck also covers a hire vehicle and a hotel if need be for 12 days. And just those 2 items alone would have blown out to be way more than the $1,200 we paid for the 3 years for that insurance.
Whether you're living at home or on the road, you're always going to have bills. So things like your health insurance, your phone and internet, Netflix, you know, all those sort of things. There are a couple that are particular to being on the road. Firstly, registration and insurance for our van. Now, we were able to change our registration from our van being a cargo van to being a motorhome once we had finished the build, and that actually brought the registration cost down a little bit. With insurance, obviously, once we did the build from a cargo van to a motorhome, the value of the van went up quite a bit, so the cost of our insurance did go up a bit as well. So those two combined were around $200 a month for rego and insurance for the van. Speaking of phone and internet, one of the biggest questions that we see in the various Van Life Australia Facebook groups is staying connected on the road. So what is the best phone and internet to have? Now, for me, this was probably the biggest challenge with this lifestyle. As I'm working on the road, working remotely, having stable internet was really important. And of course, once you get out of the cities and the big towns, here in Australia, internet is pretty much non-existent. Telstra is probably the best one to be with. They probably do have the best coverage as you're travelling around. Although, interestingly, a lot of the national parks in the Northern Territory only had Optus towers. If we were going to be staying on the road in Australia and continuing travelling here, I would definitely be investing in Starlink. Speaking to other travellers who have been using Starlink, I think it's well worth the price. I think currently it's about $175 a month in Australia for the Starlink RV package. I don't think that would have cost us much more than our current phone plans that we have. I think both of us spend in excess of $100 for our phone plans with about 180 gigabytes, which I have come close to using a couple of times. There was often a bit of dish envy when we would pull up to campsites and see people with their rectangular dishes outside their vans using their Starlink. The last thing I'm going to suggest that you budget for is flights home. So if you're going to be away for any length of time, like we were away for 3.5 years, you might want to think about flying home from time to visit family, friends. We had to go back for my son's 21st. You know, there's always those important life milestones and that sort of thing. So that's definitely something to think about adding into your budget, the cost of flights to your home city, and of course somewhere to store your van while you're away. Now, full disclosure, we did not record every cent that we spent for the full 3.5 years that we were on the road. I did start to, and I recorded everything in this book. So there's pretty much 2 years of expenses recorded here, and then I finished the book and I got a bit over it, so I stopped. I did record our trip up into outback South Australia in late 2023, and I also recorded our 6-week trip down to Tasmania. So I've got a bit of a spread there, so we can give you a bit of a comparison of what it cost us in the beginning in 21 towards the end in 24. And I can definitely attest to the fact that the cost of living crisis is very real. When we started, our budget was around $650 a week. And to be honest, that often blew out over $1,000, particularly if we were driving big distances and we had big fuel costs. Towards the end, we tried to keep it into $750 a week, but even that would blow out from time to time. But while we did have weeks in the first years of $600, we can tell you that this 4-week 4,000 kilometre loop from Melbourne up to the Flinders Ranges came in at just over $1,000 a week. And it was the same for our 6-week trip to Tasmania. Less kilometres driven, but still around $1,000 a week. Does that surprise you? Is it more or less than what you expected? $1,000 a week times 3 years? That's $150,000. So what about making money, earning money when you're on the road? You may have saved enough for your whole trip, but for most of us, that's not really the case. Now, our situation might be a little bit different than a lot of people because Nigel is actually still working in his career. He's a helicopter pilot and he currently works a 6-week rotating roster, 6 weeks on, 6 weeks off. He loves his career, so he's really happy to be still working for the last few years before he retires. And this works really well for us because when he's at home, we go travelling, and then when he goes back to work, I can do everything that I need to do, like all the video editing for our YouTube channel and writing all of the articles for our website. Now, having said that, there is so much work out there for travellers. You won't have to look very hard. I've done a couple of little jobs as we've been travelling, and it's only ever taken me a couple of hours to find some sort of work if I've needed to. Particularly once you head out of the cities and the main towns, out there in the outback, there's so much work. The roadhouses are looking for places, resorts, caravan parks. We know so many people that will travel for a while and then stop and work for a while, and they just keep repeating that. So if you're prepared to work, you're not going to have a problem finding a job out in outback Australia. Now lastly, we just want to share a couple of money-saving trips that can help you on your big lap budget. Now the first is to download the Wikicamps app. For a one-off cost of $8, this app is going to be your Bible as you're travelling around Australia. Not only does it have campsites, but also places to fill up your water and various different sightseeing places as well. Having almost up-to-date information right at your fingertips is a real godsend. So the other thing that's really good about this app is that other travellers will all put their reviews, so you know whether a place is recommended by other people or not. I am so sorry about the background noise today, guys. Now, another tip with the Wikicamps app, when you're in Wi-Fi connection, make sure you download the state information for the state that you're travelling in. That way you can use the app offline and you'll still be able to see all of those reviews, prices, all of the little updates that other users pop into the app as well. Now, the one thing the Wikicamps doesn't show you is where to get fuel. So we have always used the Petrol Spy app to help us to find the cheapest fuel. Sometimes there's not going to be a choice if you're really remote. Hello, Tom Price. But even if you're in a small town, there can often be quite a difference in price of fuel in between different fuel stations. And we've saved up to 20 cents a litre just by using this app to find the cheapest fuel. Now, our last tip, if you're thinking about having a bit of a break from your travels, before I mention flying back home, the other option is to do some house sitting or pet sitting. Now, we did pet sitting in Perth, Adelaide and Melbourne, and it's a really great way if you need to have a break from being in the van, catch up on your laundry, download all your photos if you need some Wi-Fi, and just in general, just kind of stop and stay in one place for a while. And you get the bonus of having some gorgeous cuddly pets to look after. I'm actually pet sitting right now, but the cat's a little bit scared. She doesn't want to come and say hello. With the pet sits that we've done, the shortest one has been 4 days and the longest one has been 2 weeks. Most of them tend to be around a week, which is just ideal for you to have a little break. So we've used a couple of different websites. When we were travelling around Australia, mostly we used Minder Home, but we've now started using Trusted House Sitters a bit more. And I actually prefer this website. It has that extra layer of security. You have to verify your identity when you sign up as a pet sitter, which is kind of extra security for the homeowners, and I'm sure they have to do something very similar. There are several different levels of membership that you can get on Trusted House Sitter. Some of them even give you 24/7 access to a vet should something, heaven forbid, go wrong with the animal you're looking after. We've popped a link down in the description of this video, and if you use that, you'll get $25 off your sign-up fee for Trusted House Sitters. So there you have it, our top tips for the big lap budget. We hope that this has given you a bit of an idea of how much it might cost you to travel around Australia, and also some little tips for saving some money when you're on your trip. If you want to know more about doing the big lap of Australia, go check out this video and don't miss our next episode when we're actually going overseas, somewhere completely unexpected. Don't miss it. Thanks for watching and we'll see you next time.